I need to make sure that it's going through my good mic here. 1 second. It is. I'm going to test on here to see how good I'm coming through. Looks like this could go up a little bit higher. All right, good. We're at a decent volume. All right, howdy everyone. I'm Calder. I'm one of the organizers of New Orleans game developers, along with sort of the daddy of this whole game jam thing. Really excited about getting Strawberry Jam going this time around. But this is one of our many courses we'll be having over the sort of span of these 10 days. I'm going to find a nice place to hide this so it's not in everyone's way. We're just going to put it like right here, so that's not going to be too pertinent of information when we go. But yeah, one of many courses we'll be having during Strawberry Jam. Kind of teach you just basic aspects of game design, be it in art, be it in actual design and programming, being in production, things that'll kind of get you a step ahead and get you to better understand things if you're coming from a very beginner's perspective. In this case, we've usually had an opening sort of modeling course, and I usually go into something that's a little bit more complex than I always want to. We go straight into character modeling. This time, I thought I would scale back a little bit, and we would instead focus more on just the very basics, very introductory things you can do in Blender. Blender is an extremely powerful tool. I think today we're seeing more and more like professionals using Blender than ever before, especially in the sense of just any sort of game asset creation. Even if we're not talking about things as simple as like video production or basic modeling for any other needs in games, there's just such a vibrant community around Blender, and its tools are catching up so quickly to industry standard things like Maya that it's really sort of becoming critical in a lot of people's workflow, mine included. I started out knowing and learning Maya and sort of migrated towards Blender in major part thanks to how stable it is in comparison to Maya. But with all that said, let's not get too far into details. I think the truth is about any 3D modeling stuff is it's only going to be as good as the person who uses it and the patience you have while you're using it. But let's just go from the very beginning, how we start any sort of 3D modeling in Blender. And it's pretty simple. If you open Blender, you'll be greeted with this little splash screen. It might be different depending on what version you have. I'll be using 2.92.0. Really, if you're using anything around 2.8 and onwards, should be the same general thing. Won't be that different. And we're just going to start with a general. We're not going to worry about the thing I had opened earlier. It's going to start you with this scene, essentially. And before I go into any modeling, I just want to show you what everything in this scene is. The camera here is something you're going to be using for rendering, but it's not something we're going to be using at all for modeling. Essentially, it's if we're in a render mode, it will render from the perspective of that camera, usually if it's set as the active camera. But since we're not going to be doing any rendering immediately today, don't worry about it. We'll come back to it later, and usually I make a separate camera anyway. This light is a directional light. You can't really see the influence of it right now, but if I change the mode here, and up here are your modes of how your polygonal shapes are shaded. This is a wireframe. This is non-shaded, non-textured, non-lit. This is, I think, textured but not lit, and this is a whole sort of quasi-rendered. If we see this and I move the light, we'll kind of see how the influence of the light is sort of shifted around on the polygonal faces we have. Not super important for us again. Usually, if you're making stuff for games specifically, I would just delete both of these. There's not really any use for that if we're importing it into something like Unity or Unreal or anything like that, especially camera. You could argue that there's uses for lights potentially if you're importing an entire scene, but again, I almost always think you're better off doing that stuff in Engine than you would be doing it otherwise. In the meantime, let's go through our basic sort of navigational tools. First of all, to move around as I am right now, that's just pressing in the middle mouse button and moving your cursor. It's not entirely critical that you get a standalone mouse if you're doing 3D modeling, but it is very much, very much encouraged. It will make your entire creation lifeline way easier due to just how all this stuff is, all pretty much every 3D tool is built on the navigational process of having just a regular standalone mouse. So if you're using a laptop and a mouse pad, there are options to sort of deal with that better. If we go into File, it's actually, I think it's in Edit Preferences. We go to Viewport, I believe. There is basically a button to emulate 3D mouse. Just need to find it. Either way, it's not entirely important to what we're doing right now, but it is something you can use. Let me see. Is it? Yeah, emulate 3 button mouse. Will just sort of set everything to Alt if you don't have a 3-button mouse. But again, I really encourage you to get a 3-button mouse if you ever do any sort of 3D modeling. You want to get serious about it. It is very vital. Anyways, middle mouse button is going to get you to move around. We hold Shift and press middle mouse button. We're going to be able to pan or track, go side to side. We scroll up, we move in, as well as if we press Control and move the middle mouse button, we'll kind of have a more analog sort of set on here. We can kind of slow it down, move it up. And these will kind of get you most ways. Holding Alt will get you locked in on a cardinal direction. You can kind of see it up here as well. If you want to just look at something from a very defined perspective, we do it that way. Additionally, we can just press the buttons up here. You can also move that up here as well. This might just take a little bit longer. Again, this is another thing if you don't have a 3-button mouse, but you should totally have a 3-button mouse. Over here, we have our various selection tools. This is a sort of traditional grid selection. You might want to get more acquainted with the lasso selection and 3D sort of selection because it's just very easy to select vertices, and we'll see that more coming up in a little bit. So the 3D cursor, we're going to go back to that right after I explain these. This is just our sort of move or translate function. We can move our objects around by grabbing the gizmos over here. Pretty vital, pretty essential. If you want to stage stuff, especially in object mode, that's very important. Rotate, you'll be able to tell everything because they'll all have special gizmos. There you go, rotate, grab onto a cardinal direction, you'll be able to do it that way. And if you want to have something more loose, just grab outside of those and we can rotate like this. That's transform or scale. Scale, similarly, if you want to scale everything uniformly, don't press any of the gizmo buttons, just grab the little bit out here and everything will scale at a uniform scale. If you want things to scale only vertically, press there, horizontally there, z-axis there, etc. So all these are pretty important. You'll find many uses for them as you go on. Transform is kind of a weird mishmash of every single one of those. I really don't recommend you use transform. I think just it's too cluttered and it's too annoying to grab the things you really want to grab. You're just better off using everything separately. Annotate is like, this is what grease pencil used to be back in the day, but grease pencil is a very different thing in Blender now, so don't worry about that. But you know, if you want to show that something is a box, you can write box, and look, it's written over there, box. It'll be drawn to your perspective. But if you are really serious about like grease pencil and annotations, it's a whole different tutorial. It's probably better you have a better grasp of how Blender works in general before you do this. I never use Measure, but if you're doing stuff for like 3D printing, Measure I imagine would be very important. Also, if you're sort of making stuff to scale, like if you're an environmental designer, a Measure could be useful as well. Probably best if you're going to use Measure to lock in to one of these perspectives like I did earlier. But for right now, we're not going to worry too much about measuring. You can change things on this and their scale on the fly fairly easily, as I've shown you with the scale tool. Don't worry about this. This add cube or add cone and add cylinder is a kind of cool tool. I don't use it that much, but essentially if you want to draw up a cube, you just select here, you'll select how wide it is on the ground, and then after you let go of your mouse click, you can pull it up to reach the sort of vertical size you want. This is pretty neat. I just don't find a lot of use for it, but that's just because I use the primitives, and I'll show you how to use those right after this. There are a lot of neat things that you can kind of play around with here. Like, it's pretty good for cones. What if you want a little squat cone, a little tall cone? There you go. We're gonna go over these in just a quick second, but that's your basic rundown of how these basic objects are gonna work. This stuff, not too vital for us right now, but what is important for us to learn is the difference between object mode and edit mode. Again, this stuff, we're not touching this yet, so we're only going to be going through object and edit. Edit mode brings up the actual sort of meat and potatoes of how you edit an object. If we look at our shape over here, we're going to see, let's just get real close to it. And you'll still have a square, I imagine, unless you deleted it earlier. If not, we'll you just start a new project. You'll see it pretty quickly. Anyways, square is made up of a few things, and we're going to select each one of them to show off what they are. First, we have these vertices, and they're the little points. And the vertices are essentially what says is a certain space in the 3D object renderer that we're using, right? These four things create sort of a plane or a normal. And you don't need four. Basically, it's any three will eventually create a well, it's easier to just merge these together. And I'll show merging later, but this will create a plane. Planes are good. Planes are what creates what we see as space or an object in space or anything like that. Howdy, Tomcat. And that's pretty important for the most part, but let's go through it in a very granular level before we move on. So 2 points, obviously, if we've done any math, creates a line. You can see the line over here, and if you want to select that, you can kind of do it over there. And line selection allows you to move these 2 points at once and make little complex shapes like this and change how things look. And obviously 4 points makes a face or a plane, and that allows you to grab a whole side of something and move it around as well. All of this stuff is super important, but get used to kind of working between these things and selecting what you want. If you want to be able to select all of these stuff, you can press Shift, and I'll let you do that. Usually you're not going to be doing that too much because you just have to be super precise every time you click into something, but I usually pretty much solo use the vertices tool. We'll see that a lot of our tools over here are the same that they've always been: the move, the rotate, the scale. This is from a plugin I have, don't worry about that. Annotate, measure, add cone, we saw that earlier. We're not going to be wanting to use that too much, but I'll show you why that we'll show you why that all makes sense in a little bit. Awesome. If you're in the Discord, Tomcat, feel free, if you want to sort of follow along, just join the Meetup voice channel, and I can answer any question you might have. Extrude, insert, bezel. I want to get into these very soon. We're not going to even touch these sort of non-former stuff. We're just going to go over here, and we're going to start from the very beginning. So that's edit mode, and we want to go back to object mode. If you want to switch between the two, you press tab. And why would you want to do that? Pretty simple. Let's say we want to add a cube. This cube is now part of this object, so it means we're not creating separate objects. This is still the same mesh. So if we didn't do that, I'm just pressing Control Z to undo everything, like you can do in most programs. We can just go to object mode, go into mesh, add cube, and now they're two separate objects. And usually that'll just sort of help us as we move along, having the ability to kind of have separate objects like that makes it simpler for us to manage everything that we have as we're doing stuff. But In order to sort of go over everything in 3D modeling in its most basic form, we're going to delete everything, and we're going to start and go to Add, Mesh, and for right now, actually, I'm going to go with Cylinder. Why Cylinder? Because I want to show you this menu down here. This menu will kind of show, once again, what I've been saying with vertices and how it affects how an object looks. So there's 32 vertices on this, and it looks pretty round, not perfectly round, right? Let's say we wanted to make it look more round. We can up the vertices, and we can see how that sort of blends away. If you ever play a video game, or you want, probably not a movie, but if you ever play a video game and you notice how like there's never really a perfect circle, this is essentially why. We'd be adding so many vertices before it actually gets to this soft sort of nothing look, right? We've gone from a normal 32 that kind of gets the shape away to 200 or so, and you can imagine that just sort of makes whatever you're using to look at the game struggle a little bit while we're doing there. Similarly, we can go down, and if we go to 4 vertices, we just get our square again. And there's nothing different about that. We keep going. Radius, radius affects the radius of our cylinder. Depth affects the depth and height. Our cap fill type says N-gon. I'm going to show you what that is. N-gon over here means that this is one big scary mess with no faces in between it. Now, if we get out of that, we're going to add in cylinder again. We're going to go to triangle fan, and we'll see how this sort of creates a singular fan with a middle point that we can manipulate and move. This has a lot to do with how rendering stuff works in game engines. You never really ever want N-gons. N-gons are very bad. N-gons will mess up your renderer, will make your stuff sort of have weird textures, weird animations. It's more acceptable when you're doing hard surface modeling, but we're not going to be talking too much. We're going to go first from a sort of organic character perspective, because that teaches you good habits that you don't want to bring into necessarily anything else. Anyways, try to select triangle fan for the most part. It'll give you something nice like this. You don't always have to do it if you're like not going to show a certain part. It doesn't really matter. Like, let's say this is the leg of a chair and you're not going to show this bottom portion. Don't worry too much about it. But typically, you want to avoid N-gons at all costs. Anyways, now that we've shown you how all of those things affect it, we're just going to make a new cube. And again, that's going into object mode, which if you're in edit mode, just press tab, or you can go up there and then add mesh cube. And I think you just joined the Discord. If I, okay, that's fine. That was just Ben joining our voice chat. Anyways, as we're going on here, we're gonna start our cube, and we're going to make something very simple, and it's almost something everyone makes when they are creating an object in any 3D model. We're just gonna make a mug. Anyways, here's our base. You might say to yourself, how do we make a mug out of this? I'm going to show you the very easy way, the less easy way, but better way, and etc., etc. So we have our 4 faces. We're going to select one of our faces by going up here and selecting our face tool. And we're going to select extrude, we're going to do extrude region. We're going to see if we extrude the region, we kind of create an inner area in there, right? Like, now we have something that can actually take in volume. Extrude essentially takes whatever face you're selecting and creates 4 more faces around it. And don't worry about these little things too much. I'll go over why this is probably not the best practice in a little bit. And then creates a face in the middle of it in order to sort of make the illusion of volume. You might be saying, like, that's way too thin. This is not how a mug would work. I agree. All we have to do, change the scale, and we're going to have a very, very basic mug here. But as I said, this is a very, very basic mug. It's probably just a glass, right? It's probably not how we're going to want to make things look. So let's go back to the beginning, just Control-Z all the way back into what we have again. And let's make something a little more round and something that looks a little bit more like a mug. So we're going to go over here to our loop cut tool, and I call this a subdivision tool, but you know, call it what you want. Loop cut tool will automatically sort of lock itself to the centermost proportions of any face you're selecting or sort of hovering over. What you're going to do when you do that is you're going to create two faces out of one face all the way around the object, essentially subdividing it all the way there. And that gives us just a little bit more depth and dimension, a lot like the cylinder we were looking at earlier. We're going to do it on both sides, so it's mostly symmetrical. And if we do that, we're going to see something else really cool. We're already selecting this sort of long edge loop. If we want to select another edge loop, make sure that the line selection tool up here in edit mode is selected. Press Alt, Shift, click that, and we'll have this loop selected as well. And what are we going to do with this? Sorry if I'm moving around too much. I want to make this very beginner friendly. We can either do this. Our only problem is it'll go vertically. What I typically do is I just extend out this way. But let's make it pixel perfect. So we're gonna press Z up here to see it from the top, and let's extend it. Let's say 4 of these little points on our grid upward. You can snap to grid if you'd rather do this sort of stuff, but we're gonna be a little bit loose here. And we're just gonna go up there, and we're gonna do the same up there. And all of a sudden, our cube is now a cylinder, which is pretty neat. All right. So now that we have a cylinder, we can make it look a little bit more like a mug. First of all, our cylinder is a little bit flat. So we're going to select all of these faces here. If you want to select more than one face at a time, just press Shift and then click another face. So if I press a face once, it won't do anything. But if I press Shift or hold Shift while pressing a face, see I can select more than one. We'll just pull it up a little bit. Now, what we want to do is we're going to press Insert Faces. And what Insert Faces is pretty much the exact same thing as Extrude Region, but it does it in a little bit of a different way. Instead of how last time when we extruded the region brought it down or up first, this is going to bring it inward first. So we'll press Extrude Region, bring that down, and we'll see how it kind of does that. Similarly though, we'll see it also makes subdivisions out of the areas around it, much like the case with the extrude, right? It'll make something, it'll give it depth by adding more faces. And that's, I would say, pretty much what 3D modeling is. You're giving things depth by adding more planar faces around something. Now that we've done this, we can go back to Extrude Region. While we still had these 4 faces selected, and these new faces are not selected, and we'll just pull it down, and we'll have a far more convincing mug, right? It might actually be going down a little bit too far. No, it's fine. Kind of looks along the level. There's actual depth to it. There's a place you could perceivably put your lips on. But what's a mug without a handle? It's not a mug at all. So let's do that really quickly. We're going to make one other thing, and I'm going to show you again how Insert Faces works sort of in tandem with Extrude Region. So we're going to make a subdivision here, and that'll create these subdivisions all around here. We can do this to create sort of depth, and if we want to make the mug like maybe a little bit fatter in the middle or a little bit skinnier in the middle, we can do it that way too. It's a really good way to kind of change how a certain depth is affected within an object. You know, it gives it a better profile. So don't always try to make things uniform. It's good for things to be a little bit skinnier or a little bit fatter depending on where they are. Anyways, you do that, but what we really wanted to do with this is now we can select one of the 2 faces we've done here. I'm going to select both of them. We're not going to select both of them. I'm going to select one, and we're going to bring it in smaller. Let's say there. That's fine for now. We're going to do the same over here. We're going to try to match it up. And what we can do, if we want to make these even smaller, we can bring them together. And let's bring this back up. We'll do it the same on the other side. We'll try to match it using our wireframe tool. We'll try to match it maybe like 1 down. So right here and one up here. So there we go. This isn't really perfect. We can see how some of that sort of global settings has maybe malformed it a little bit. That's because we're using a global transformation option, which means when I move something on these planes, they'll be moving according to how it would look on this sort of global grid we have all around us. Now, if we do that on a local scale, actually not on local, we're going to do a normal scale, it'll align itself to our object here, align itself to the normals. Normals are the sort of flat planes outside of here of our object instead of the area around it. We're just going to do that. We're going to put on normal. Just for now, though, we're going to make these roughly similar, and we'll see how that doesn't have the same deformation anymore. It's along the faces we've created here. That's pretty neat, though. I'm sorry if I'm going pretty fast. Feel free to scroll around, go back. Our VODs will all be available on the New Orleans Game Dev YouTube, as well as here on Twitch for a short amount of time. So if I'm going too fast, tell me in chat, but feel free to go back and forth. I need to get some key things here. Anyways, we're going to go back to extrusion. We're going to actually highlight this before we go back to extrusion. We're going to get both of these. Remember, these are shift clicks. We're going to do that. We're going to extrude. And that's going to start to create a little handle for our mug. If we want to move these things closer together, we can use translate. We can even rotate them a little bit, but that won't make them in flush. So let's just keep extruding and keep sort of vertically scaling them down. And we'll see how it's kind of making it more thin here. Don't worry too much about that. Anyways, from here, I'm going to rotate this probably only like 30 degrees or so. If you want to see how much I'm rotating, you'll see how it has this rotate angle over here. Oh, I just knocked over something in front of me. We can type in 30 and it'll do a 30-degree rotation. Similarly, we can do the same thing here, rotate it up, probably press -30, and it'll do the same thing. So we're mostly in the same spot for these two guys. I'm going to do one more, and I'm just going to do that. We're going to try to get it flush, but it's not going to be perfect, but it won't matter too much, and I'll show you why soon. Again, same side, rotate, we're going to go, I'm going to say 60 on this one. I don't really love where it's sitting, so I'm going to push it in a little bit so it creates a nicer curve. I'm going to pull it down a little bit, and we'll try to find a better curve there. Same thing on this side. Over here, -60, because the other one was 60. And since we're still on normal, it'll go along in the sort of style and the orientation of our prior things here. Anyways, last thing we're going to do, now that these guys are mostly in line, I'm going to extrude one more time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off wireframe. I'm going to go back to here. And I'm going to select this vertice. And remember, we can select using this tool up here. Circle lasso is really useful for this, right? Or we can select it by clicking it right on. And we're going to select this vertice. We're going to select the opposite vertice over here. With these two selected, we're going to press M, and this is merge. We're going to go to at last or at center. It doesn't matter. We're going to go to at last. And it's going to bring this point and make it the same as this point over here. It's going to weld it into there. And then we're starting to connect our two sides of our mug. We're going to do it all the way around. M at last. I'm going to show you how it works differently. So if I collect this one first and then collect this one after that, we're going to do M at first. We'll still do the same thing. And just to show you how these two things will be different, we're going to do M at center. We don't want that, obviously. It creates a, it becomes less congruent with the rest of our sides. So we're just going to do M, I believe that was at first. Good. And now our mug has a little handle. And this looks a lot more like a mug than our mug before. You might still think to yourself, and it'd be a reasonable thought to have, this doesn't look too much like a mug. Still looks like this blocky collection of 3D modeled junk. Well, you'd be right. Before I show you how we fix that, I'm just going to scale these into each other a little more. We're going to go back to global as well. Just going to scale it down and try to make some good poly grouping here. Anyways, here's our mug. But let's say we want to make this mug a little bit more, less blocky. We're going to go out of edit mode, go back into the normal shading. And now that we have all this selected, we're going to actually finally move to this panel over here. You see this little wrench? These are modifiers. In Maya, traditionally, you can literally, I think, just press 3, and it'll have a smooth mode that adds subdivisions to whatever you're making. Blender, it's a little bit more obscure, but it still exists within the same thing. We go to Subdivision Surface. And this one adds a level of subdivisions of your choosing to the renderer based on how you modeled your object. So if we add this, we can add more subdivisions and it gets more clear. And we'll kind of see that there's still some sort of stuff that doesn't look quite perfect here, right? This little area down here and this little area over here. However, we can kind of see how it creates a far more organic shape that looks a lot more like a mug. And all it's really doing is just extrapolating where it could add additional subdivisions based on where I've already created it here within the mug. If we wanted it to be a little bit more uniform or not have these little deformations around the edge here, very easy. We can just do that in our own modeling. So let's go down here. And we'll make sure that it hacks to subdivide along this edge first. So we're gonna I'm gonna give it a little bit of a funny little thing here because kind of like more like a normal base for a mug. And we can see how that creates a far more sort of better bottom to it. We still have some issues along this portion, right? Now make sure that's still in here. That worked out nice. This isn't quite going the way we want it to. If we want to do that, we can just add another subdivision. Make sure everything's fluid. It mostly is. See how that works? We have a little bit better handle because of that. And these are sort of the simple things to rectify how you're going to be making things later on as we kind of go into, higher poly modeling. But it also makes it so you can get a good idea of what things would look like on a sort of more detailed scale, and how we can use low poly modeling to really speed up high poly modeling, because what we did with just less than probably 30 or so faces, 30 quads, we just went to the subdivision tool, and look at that, we made something that looks like a high poly model. If you want this to be permanent, we'll once again get out of edit mode. Make sure you're out of mode. We're just going to press apply, and then you'll see the new mesh has been applied. And that's really like how you go through the very, very basics of 3D modeling. If we want to influence some other things, we can influence how the profile of this stuff works. Let me show you some fun tools that will definitely make 3D modeling easier for you. I actually usually use select box for whatever reason. Remember how I said we press Alt to select tool? We're going to do that, and we're also going to select proportional editing. What proportional editing is essentially it chooses every sort of vertex nearby in a certain radius of your points, and it'll move them all kind of proportionally based on the sort of algorithm you choose from here. I like to choose connected only, and we're going to go down here. If this is affecting too much, you can scroll your scroll wheel. I think it's also page up or page down, and you can affect the sort of sphere of influence it has when it does this, which is super useful. Like let's say I don't want the whole thing affected, just like a little bit fatter right here, or a little bit skinnier. Let's do skinnier, just right here. And it'll create sort of a smoother variation of how this handle will work. But honestly, handles are usually bigger around the side there, so we'll do that. We can similarly do that here. And really what it does is it's almost like a cheat. We're gonna do it along normals again as well, so it goes along the edge of our thing. So it would be fatter along here, right? And we bring that out and make that fatter. And you can keep playing with this forever. This stuff is super useful. It'll make everything, your whole process will just, I guarantee, just go a lot quicker. Some other things, if you don't think the mesh is sort of looking perfect or the shading's kind of weird, there's a lot of cleanup options. Let's say you didn't merge anything, we can do merge by distance, but I'm absolutely certain we did merge everything. We'll go to faces. I just want to make sure that everything is sort of going the right way. Extrude faces along normals. Don't want to do that, absolutely not. UV, will not be going into UVs quite yet, though we do have something that goes into that in our YouTube channel. You usually want to make sure that each of the faces are sort of on the same normals. There we go. We're gonna just reticulate outside, and I'm just gonna see if that fixes. No, you know what? That's fine. Anyways, that's our mug, and a fine mug it is. And you can straight up import this mug super easy into any sort of project you're doing. You haven't added materials to it yet. Materials are a whole nother can of worms. If you're interested in learning about materials, we have another thing on our YouTube channel that'll teach you a little bit more about materials and how that process works. But if you want to do materials, very basically, we just go into material properties. We can create a new material. Don't worry about all of this. We're not even touching that. We're just going to use, where's a decent, simple, just an emission shader. Actually, diffuse. And I don't know, let's make it red. Select all of it, assign it, and we'll make sure that it's there. And look, our cup is red now. Exciting. If we want to change how this material takes on color, we can put on a glossy BDSF. We can change our roughness values, and we'll see how it kind of shades itself a little better as we do that. It's gonna be more clear once we do that and we go into something like rendering. But I would say, since there is no light in here, we'll just add, we're not gonna be able to see it too well. Let's add a light, add a little point light. Whoop. It might be better to add directional light. Point lights are usually far less powerful than a sort of spot or a sunlight or a directional light. So if we move that over here, we rotate our sunlight to hit it. There we go. Looks like a mug, huh? Wasn't that hard? And now we got something we can put into a game. With that said, maybe we want to do sort of character modeling. If you are interested in doing character modeling, I have a far more extensive tutorial on our YouTube channel. Once again, that's neworleansgamedev.com. But this is really one of the most basic tutorials when it comes to 3D modeling. It's just telling you how to make a thing, why to make a thing a certain way, and the do's and don'ts. We use quads all the way. We made a simple model, and we just did it really quickly. If you want something more complex, like how to put a character together, how to UV paint it, and how to animate that character, I'll be teaching how to animate the character, I think, on Sunday. Additionally, with that animation stuff, I'll teach you how to bring the stuff into Unity. Tomorrow, Saturday, I'm going to do a very basic how to make a sprite, how to animate a sprite, all that sort of fun stuff. But this was just primarily how to make an object in Unity and how to make it look a certain way. And hopefully, from what you've seen on this, you can also infer how to make different objects within Unity using the same sort of techniques I've shown you here. I didn't want this one to be too long. I didn't want this one to really go on or teach you how to make anything too great. We have some very much longer ones over on our YouTube channel if you just go scrub over there. But this was just very base introductory stuff, because what you can often kind of do, or I figured out I do very often when I teach this, is you can get very ahead of yourself and you can maybe overload people with stuff as they're just trying to learn. And I don't want to do that. It's good to kind of learn the stuff at a certain even pace, because you'll sort of retain it a little bit better than if you learn 1,000 things at once and why you have to make things a certain way. The only rules I would say that you totally have to know when you're making something in a 3D model is, if you're doing something organic, try to make it one mesh and try to make sure that your mesh is composed of quads, especially if it moves. If you're trying to make something inorganic, it doesn't have to be one mesh as much. Tries are all right, though not always encouraged. N-gons are death, never use them. And I would say those are the things that I wish I knew when I was first learning. I made some really ugly, silly models that still worked, but barely as I was doing that. If we want to export this mug and bring it into a game, I might as well show you right now. You can just go to File, Export, either FBX or OBJ. With something this simple, I often just go to OBJ. I don't necessarily need it to have the material group, so I would just go Limit to Selection, OBJ Objects, and we can export it as, I don't know, mug. There's mug, and once we do that, our object will be exported and can be put into your game just by simply importing any OBJ. There's probably absolutely zero game engines that accept 3D objects that don't accept OBJs. FBXs are way more useful if you're doing something like animation, or you have something that's very meticulously detailed on materials. You'll want to use an FBX when you bring it into another program, but for something that's a very simple geometry like this, OBJ is fine. And now that we've done that, look, we can use all the transform tools together and stuff like that. I hope this wasn't too much. I wanted this to be a very basic course because, as I've said before, we have more extensive courses, especially on character modeling and how to build with reference on our YouTube channel. But I did realize, as I talked to some friends of mine, I try to introduce them to 3D modeling, that sometimes without sort of these basic skills, it becomes more difficult to go ahead and tackle things that are even harder. So anyways, I'm happy to have taught all y'all just this very simple little thing. I'm looking forward to what everyone makes for the Strawberry Game Jam. Thanks for sticking around, and thanks for watching, y'all. Take it easy.